The Russian Civil War took place between 1918 and 1921. The Red Army was created in January 1918 and fought to maintain the Bolsheviks' armed seizure of power following the October Revolution in 1917. The Red Army answered directly to the Bolshevik-dominated Sovnarkom, otherwise known as the Council of People's Commissars. Lenin was the chief minister, and the first commissars were all Bolsheviks. This meant the Red Army would become dominated by the Bolsheviks, and their ideology had a huge influence over the army's operation. The decree forming the Red Army stated recruits were to dedicate themselves to the October Revolution, the power of the Soviets, and socialism, directly aligning the army's purpose with revolutionary objectives. The Marxist ideology, which underpinned the Bolshevik Party, perceived the establishment of communism as an inevitable product of history. This thinking is evident in Lenin's book, Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism, which was published in 1916. This notion motivated soldiers who believed in revolutionary values to fight as their victory was perceived to be certain. Lenin's leadership elevated the role of violence in Marxist theory. As far back as 1906, Lenin had already started ideologically preparing for civil war. In his pamphlet titled Guerrilla Warfare, published in 1906, Lenin stated that a protracted civil war would be inevitable and that one must learn to fight. Foreshadowing the Bolsheviks' militarization, Lenin argued for a fighting party to lead the working classes. This advocacy of violence was down to the centrality of the belief that the ends justify the means in Bolshevism. During the debates of April 1917, Lenin, who previously almost exclusively focused on the revolutionary potential of the proletariat, the urban working class, clashed with the old Bolsheviks, who believed in attracting peasants to the cause. Following this, Lenin adopted their ideas. Lenin stated that the old Bolshevik formulation, which included peasants as revolutionaries, was confirmed. Therefore, by October, there was a general ideological consensus amongst the Bolshevik leadership of what the goal of the Red Army was, and who the Red Army was to include. Therefore, by the Russian Civil War's onset, the Bolsheviks were ideologically ripe to lead the Red Army to victory. The Bolsheviks faced the challenge of building and supplying a new army in a country which had been strained by war since August 1914. In this situation, they had to adapt their communist ideology into a practical set of socio-economic policies known as war communism. These directed the economy's dwindling resources towards the Red Army. Fundamental to this was the economic centralization under Bolshevik Party leadership. In June 1918, a decree nationalized enterprises valued above 1 million rubles. Beforehand, in December 1917, a decree allowed workers to nationalize factories themselves if the bosses stopped production, helping prevent even further reductions in industrial capacity. The Vyshenka, the Supreme Council of the National Economy, was established to organize the output on a national level. Authoritarian expropriation was ideologically justifiable under the notion of the dictatorship of the proletariat. Under this, the working classes could monopolize the state apparatus to achieve socialism. Due to the Bolsheviks' belief that the ends justify the means, almost nothing was out of bounds if it aided the Red Army's eventual victory. From May 1918, a program of food requisitioning named Produstverdska, food apportionment, began. They needed to maintain the food supply to industrial cities to sustain industrial production of arms and ammunition for the Red Army. When food was most needed, widespread starvation gripped Russia. A propaganda offensive, endorsed by the leadership, claimed rural areas were hoarding food. The Commissariat of Food enforced a state grain monopoly. Its officials collected a food tax from villagers. Non-payment could involve punishment against whole communities. After the introduction of the Razvetsa quota, villagers had to relinquish a significant amount of grain regardless of their production. Committees of the poor, dominated by Bolshevik members, concentrated on what they classified as so-called rich peasants. They ideologically justified their questionable actions by insinuating peasants were oppressing the urban working class with their selfishness. These policies proved effective, with the procurement of food and taxation being over double the Tsarist level. In 1920, more than 10% of national income was siphoned off to the Red Army, an achievement considering the much larger Imperial Tsarist army took only 9% of national income during 1916 to 1917. The Council of Workers and Peasants' Defense directed manufacturing institutions under their respective economic commissariats. It allocated resources to the Red Army's most vulnerable fronts. The leadership of the Bolshevik Party in orientating swathes of the economy into a supply line for the army would prove vital in winning military engagements for the Reds. Leadership was fundamental to the Red Army's success. This included not only Trotsky, but the vast array of officers and logistical staff that the Red Army developed. Initially, the Red Army operated an ineffective model of democratically elected officers. Strategic plans were often resolved by a show of hands without central leadership. Trotsky, as Commissar for War, led the Red Army and exerted huge influence over its development. He recognized the exigency for competent leadership at all levels, criticizing democratically elected officers as inexpedient. In October 1918, Trotsky proclaimed ex-Tsarist officers would be recruited to address the great need for military specialists. This proved controversial, with a military opposition faction within the Bolshevik Party resisting the move. Trotsky argued that it was better that regiments succeed with these ex-Tsarist officers than to perish without them. During the war, 75,000 ex-Tsarist officers were recruited. These officers imbued a sense of discipline which enabled the Reds to strategically outmaneuver the Whites. The Red victory over a White Army's assault against Petrograd in 1919 gives an insight into the Army's operation. Defense of the city of Petrograd was insisted on by Trotsky despite Lenin's call for a retreat. Personally leading in the city, Trotsky made a rallying speech in an amphitheater. Eyewitness Viktor Serge credited Trotsky with raising morale, praising his oratory. Trotsky frequently put himself on numerous front lines, taking a hands-on approach. Serge further commended Trotsky's entourage of advisors, including specialists in provisioning, engineering, and artillery, claiming that they took everything in hand. These experts, likely of Tsarist origin, will have provided leadership to inexperienced Red fighters. Trotsky's decision to counterattack decimated the attacking White Army. In recognizing the practical steps needed to reorganize, Trotsky was not unique. Ex-Tsarist General Bolshevik devised many reforms and swayed many former colleagues to join the Red Army. Nevertheless, Trotsky's political influence made Bolsheviks actions possible. Trotsky's determination to involve imperial officers prevented the army from becoming a rabble. Military commissars were introduced to prevent subversion by ex-Tsarist officers and to placate internal opposition against the introduction of these officers. This ensured the army was not only militarily capable, but also loyal to the Bolshevik government at the same time. The commissars initially only had a control function. For example, an order in April 1918 stated that these commissars were the direct organ of Soviet power in the army. However, they developed a more political role over time, becoming more aligned with the Bolshevik Party in itself, as opposed to the Soviets in general. Educational programs, such as Red Army schools and libraries, drilled ideology into Red Army soldiers. During 1919, 8,245,124 rubles was spent on meeting the demand for literature on the front lines. These programs helped give Red Army soldiers an ideological motivation to fight. Nonetheless, this political work was not the decisive factor in securing Red victory. The practical knowledge of ex-Tsarist officers was valued higher at the time, with Trotsky ruling that commissars were not allowed to overrule their orders without an inquiry. Significantly, when dissension fractured the Southern Front's leadership, as commissars, including Joseph Stalin, tried to oust the ex-Tsarist General Pavel Sitin, the Revolutionary Military Council of the Republic, led by Trotsky, rebuked Stalin. The Central Committee punished Stalin by revoking his army post. This demonstrates the Red Army prioritized the right type of leadership, which was based on technical competency while still enforcing ideology to maintain morale through commissars. The Reds proved effective at mobilizing peasants due to an organized approach by its leadership. One of the first Bolshevik decrees in October 1917 sanctioned land reform, showing the leadership recognized the importance of appeasing the peasants. Due to this, peasants in the Volga, in general, at least at first, lacked a desire to fight against the Reds, despite the attempt to appeal to them by white organizations such as Komuk, the Committee of Members of the Constituent Assembly, which advocated democracy. In summer 1918, the Komuk only enlisted 10,000 men compared to the Reds' recruitment of 1.6 million men from the Volga alone between July and September 1919. Following the Fifth Congress of Soviets, a centralized program of conscription began, forcing civilians into the Red Army. The Red Army leadership structure was indispensable. Trotsky recollected that the peasantry, taken by itself, is incapable of creating a centralized army, which had to be built from above. Due to most peasants being locally tied, many deserted. A centralized administration was required to stop this and utilize peasants more strategically. A carrot and stick approach was taken to deserters, demonstrated by Lenin's order in December 1918, which condemned deserters while offering a short amnesty for those who returned. The Central Commission for the Struggle with Desertion organized punitive actions. The leadership, including Lenin, began using conciliatory language towards the so-called middle peasants, dropping their ideological opposition to them for pragmatic purposes. This facilitated a slight alleviation of aggressive policies. Concessions, such as extra food, for family members of Red Army soldiers were implemented. The leadership of the Red Army's focus on the peasantry allowed the Red Army to amass the manpower it needed. By 1920, the Red Army possessed 5 million men, of whom 75% were peasants. Ultimately, the triumph of the Red Army came from its effective structure of leadership. The Reds' preparation for a civil war under Lenin's leadership and their ability to compromise, as shown in the April 1917 debates, ideologically prepared them for the compromises warfare required. This ideology would permeate the Red Army. Lenin's recognition of the peasantry's importance gave the Red Army an upper hand. Peasant gratitude for concessions, especially in land reform, combined with stringent, centrally controlled recruitment measures, enabled the Reds to outnumber the Whites vastly. Amalgamating this manpower advantage with the leadership of ex-Tsarist officers enabled decisive victories, notably at Petrograd, for the Reds. It is unlikely that untrained men would have triumphed without the leadership of these ex-Tsarist officers. Furthermore, the Red Army's mantra of war communism effectively integrated the economy into the army supply lines. These policies of centralization were only possible under the Bolshevik Party's leadership, who led the Red Army's development into a fearsome army for decades to come.